Welcome back to Truthish, where the stories are mostly true and always strange. It's been a minute, hasn't it? World's been busy catching fire, falling apart, and arguing over whether ghosts can vote. But it is that time of the year. But we're still here, digging through the weird corners of history to bring you the unbelievable, the unsettling, and the occasionally darkly hilarious. So if you've missed your weekly dose of, wait, that actually happened, grab your coffee, dim the lights, and settle in. Because tonight we've got a story that proves that truth is sometimes much stranger than fiction and occasionally twice as radioactive. Let's get weird. There's having a bad week, and then there's Tomatsu Yamaguchi week. Most of us complain about traffic, broken printers, or a boss who thinks urgent means ruin your lunch. Yamaguchi had to deal with being in the wrong city twice when the world decided to test its first nuclear weapons on civilians. This is the story of a man who survived not one, but two atomic bombs, and he still clocked into work the next morning. Because apparently the apocalypse isn't an excuse to miss the day at Mitsubishi. It's a Monday, hot, the kind of summer heat that makes the air feel sticky. Hiroshima was already awake. Street vendors were setting up, streetcars humming, school children in crisp white uniforms running late as usual. Yamaguchi, 29 years old, thin, serious, and polite to a fault, was walking to the shipyard for his final day of a 3-month business trip. He was designing oil tankers, part of Japan's desperate war effort. He'd been sleeping in a dormitory near the yard, dreaming of heading home to his wife and baby in Nagasaki. But that morning, halfway down the road, he realized he'd forgotten his travel papers. A small thing, a nuisance really. He sighed, muttered something that was probably the 1940s Japanese equivalent of, "You've got to be kidding me," and turned back. That decision, that one small, frustrating, and mundane mistake, would put him exactly where he shouldn't be. It was 8:15 a.m. He heard the drone of a single plane overhead. Unusual, but not terrifying. Hiroshima had grown complacent. It had never been heavily bombed before. He looked up, saw a small silver speck cutting across the blue sky. He squinted. Then, without a sound, the world turned white. The flash so bright it seemed to erase color itself. The air exploded. The heat wave, hotter than the surface of the sun, tore across the city. He didn't even hear it, not at first. He just felt it, like being hit by God's hand. The shock wave threw him across the ground, ripped the eardrums out of his head, and set the air itself on fire. The temperature reached 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Paint ignited. Shadows were burned into the concrete. When he opened his eyes again, the world was unrecognizable. The city was gone. He was in a crater made of ash. The sky was a boiling red bruise. His left side was burned raw, his hair singed to stubble, and his skin hung in ribbons. But he was alive. He stumbled towards the ruins of the shipyard, looking for his coworkers. One was dead. The other was just gone. He wrapped his burns in torn cloth and began walking toward the black column of smoke rising from downtown. Because what else do you do when the world ends? The air smelled like burnt metal and blood. The streets, if you could call them that anymore, were littered with things that used to be people. A child's shoe, a bicycle twisted into a pretzel, a woman's hand clutching nothing. He found a rice field where survivors had gathered. Their skin hung in sheets too. Some walked without eyes. Others didn't walk at all. Someone asked him for water, but when he handed it over, they drank it and died instantly. He vomited until there was nothing left. Then he walked on. By evening, he made it to the edge of the city and found what remained of the train station. And in one of history's strangest ironies, the trains were still running. The same rails that had melted and twisted near Ground Zero somehow held firm a few miles out. He climbed aboard, sitting among scorched survivors, wrapped in silence, and rode into the night. The train's whistle sounded like a ghost crying through the smoke. 2 days later, burned, deaf, and barely conscious, Yamaguchi arrived in Nagasaki. His wife, Hisako, Almost didn't recognize him. He was bandaged like a mummy. His body was blistered and blackened, but he was alive. She wept and cleaned his wounds and told him to rest. He told her what happened, the flash, the fire, the city erased. She listened in disbelief. When he returned to work at Mitsubishi, because apparently he was the most responsible man in history, his boss didn't believe him either. No bomb could do that, he said. You must be mistaken. Yamaguchi opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, the sky lit up again. It was 11:02 a.m. The second atomic bomb, Fat Man, exploded 2 miles away. The windows shattered in his office. Glass flew like shrapnel. He dove to the floor, covering his head, his body still bandaged from the first blast. The roar hit seconds later, flattening the world all over again. Outside, Nagasaki's cathedral evaporated, the hills caught fire, and the city that welcomed him home turned into rubble in less than a heartbeat. Yamaguchi thought, oh no, not again. And somehow, impossibly, he survived again. He stumbled home through the smoke and ruin, ears ringing, face bleeding, half laughing at the absurdity. His home was gone, reduced to timber and dust. But Hisako and their son were alive. Why? Because she had left early that morning to find burn cream for his injuries. When the flash came, she jumped into a drainage ditch, clutching their baby. The ditch saved them both. Some people call that luck, others call it destiny. I call it the most dramatic ad for always go early to the pharmacy ever made. In both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the days after the bombs were worse than the blasts themselves. People drank contaminated water, burns festered, radiation sickness began its slow, invisible work. Fever, vomiting, skin peeling, hair falling in clumps. Yamaguchi's wounds reopened. His hair came out in handfuls. He was barely 100 pounds, too weak to stand for long. And yet he didn't die. He healed, slowly, painfully. Doctors later said he must have been standing just far enough from both ground zeros to avoid lethal radiation, protected partly by walls, partly by pure cosmic comedy. When asked years later how he survived, he shrugged and said, I was in the right place at the wrong time, twice. That's the kind of understatement you only earn by surviving two mushroom clouds. For years, no one believed him. He was registered as a survivor of Hiroshima, but when he told officials he'd also been in Nagasaki, they thought it was a clerical error. Even fellow survivors doubted him, until records confirmed that he left Hiroshima the day of the bombing. The Japanese government eventually recognized him officially in 2009, making him the only known person to have survived both blasts. He was 93. When reporters asked him what he thought about it, he quietly said, the reason I hate atomic bombs is because of what they do to ordinary people. No drama, no vengeance, just weary truth. Yamaguchi went on to live a long, full life. He became a teacher, a poet. He spoke publicly about nuclear disarmament, often with a kind of calm that unnerved interviewers. When a British filmmaker asked if he was angry with the Americans, he smiled and said, what good would anger do? I've seen enough fire to last 2 lifetimes. He traveled to New York once to address the United Nations. Standing there beneath the same flag that had once hovered over the Enola Gay, he told diplomats, there is nothing as cruel as war. No city should ever disappear again. They applauded politely, then went back to arguing about weapons budgets. Go figure. Tamatsu Yamaguchi died peacefully in 2010 at his home in Nagasaki, the same city that should have killed him 65 years earlier. He was 93 years old. His story became legend, part tragedy, part miracle, part cosmic joke. Because really, what are the odds? To survive one atomic bomb is unthinkable. To survive two, well, that's when you start to wonder if the universe is messing with you personally. Some call him the luckiest man alive, others the unluckiest. But maybe the truth is somewhere in between, because sometimes fate doesn't pick sides. It just spins the wheel, laughs, and says, let's see what's going to happen this time. You know, there's a fine line between luck and punishment. Some people spend their lives dodging tragedy. Others seem to walk right through it and keep going. Tsutomu Yamaguchi didn't just survive history, he lived through it twice and still made it to work on time. Maybe that's what makes his story so human. Not just the survival, but the stubborn refusal to stop living, even when the universe quite literally explodes around you. Maybe he saw the end of the world 2 times and somehow came out the other side just a little singed, a little wiser, and with the best excuses in history for being late. If these stories make you wonder, if they make you laugh, think, or double check your calendar for mushroom clouds, then make sure you're following Truthish. We've got plenty more stories that are mostly true and always strange. Thanks for watching.